The wind was the first shaman. For generations it had spoken to the people of the long river, whispering of the mammoth herd's return in the spring, and moaning warnings of the winter's first killing frost. But now, the wind only screamed. It was a thin, hungry sound that sliced through the hide tents and stole the warmth from the hearth fires, carrying with it the scent of sickness and an ending. The herds were failing. Blight, foul and swift, turned the caribou's eyes milky in their gait to a drunken stagger. The great bison, once numberless, were now scarce, their bones littering the plains like fallen timber. The people, 80 souls huddled against the vast, indifferent face of Siberia, were starving. Kale felt the clan's fear as a physical weight. He was a hunter of 20 winters, his senses honed to the subtle language of the steppe, but the land had fallen silent. The tracks were old, the trail signs barren. He saw the fear in the eyes of the children and in the bowed shoulders of the elders. He saw it most clearly in the face of Borin, his chieftain. Borin was a man of great strength but shallow roots, a leader who mistook loudness for authority, and who now looked to the spirits for answers the land would no longer provide. And the spirits, it seemed, spoke only through one person, Anya, the seer. She stood before the clan's great fire, her silhouette a gnarled branch against the flames. Age had bent her back, but had not touched the fierce light in her eyes. She held up a mammoth shoulder blade, scorched and cracked from the fire, and an awed silence fell over the gathered people. The spirits are angry. Anya's voice was a crack of thunder, silencing the wind. They cry out from the ice. The land is cursed. We have taken too much, and now it will be taken from us. A long winter comes, a winter of black ice and red sickness that will spare no one. The mammoth soul is turning its back on us. A collective gasp of terror rippled through the crowd. Borin stepped forward, his face ashen. What must we do, seer? How can we appease them? Anya's gaze lifted, sweeping eastward, past the worried faces, past the edge of the firelight. Into the infinite, frozen dark, there is one path. A vision has been granted to me. She spoke of a grueling pilgrimage, a journey to the place where the sun died each night. They must walk the sun's last path, across the endless grass, beyond the horizon, until they found a new world, the land of unbroken mountains. A land of plenty, a promised sanctuary where the curse could not follow. Leave the long river, a voice cried out. Leave the land of our ancestors. Your ancestors are dust, Anya retorted, her voice merciless. Would you join them, or will you walk into the dawn and live? Kale watched her, a knot of unease, tightening in his stomach. Her words were powerful, her performance flawless, yet something felt wrong. Too perfect. He had known Anya his whole life. She had been a quiet woman, a skilled healer. Until 5 winters ago, when she had vanished during a blizzard and returned a week later, half dead but reborn, claiming the spirits had shown her the secret heart of the world. Since then, her influence over the clan and over Borin had become absolute. Kale respected her wisdom, but he trusted the evidence of his own eyes more than her pronouncements, and he saw a strange cold fire in her that looked less like divine insight and more like something else. Something ancient and hard as flint. But his doubt was a lone snowflake in a blizzard of belief. Borin, his face alight with desperate faith, raised his spear. The seer has spoken. We will not die here like trapped rabbits. We will walk the sun's last path. We'll be the people of the unbroken mountains. A great roar went up from the tribe. It was the sound of fear being forged into hope. Kale said nothing. He looked at the faces of his people and saw that the decision was already made. Their great migration had begun not with a step, but with a story. The departure was an exodus of ghosts leaving their own graves. They abandoned the sacred burial grounds, the familiar river bends, the hills that held the stories of their lineage. An entire nation, reduced to what they could carry on their backs, turned eastward and walked into the wind. The land they entered was Beringia, the Mammoth Steppe. It was a world of impossible scale. The sky was a vast, empty bowl, the land a frozen ocean of dry grass that stretched to every horizon, broken only by the shadow of a distant herd or the lonely passage of a glacier-fed river. This was the kingdom of giants. Their first mammoth hunt in the new land was a disaster. It was a lone bull, old and immense, its curved tusks yellowed with age. Borin, eager to prove the wisdom of the journey, led the charge with more courage than sense. The beast, wounded and enraged, turned on them, its trumpeting call a sound of pure fury. It shattered one hunter's leg with a sweep of its trunk and gored another before Kale and a few seasoned hunters could distract it, using their spears to finally bleed it out in a slow, agonizing ballet of death. They had meat, but the cost was high. That night, as the clan mourned its dead, Anya declared the mammoth spirit had been a test of their resolve, a sacrifice demanded by the spirits to purify their purpose. Borin nodded in fervent agreement. Kale, dressing the other hunters' wounds, saw only a poorly planned hunt. They walked for a full turning of the seasons. They endured a summer of biting flies and a winter so cold it cracked the very stones. An elder, too weak to continue, sang his death song one night and was still by morning. A baby was born during a snowstorm, its first cry swallowed by the howl of the wind. They were no longer the people of the long river. They were nomads, defined only by the direction of their travel. Kel's reputation grew. His quiet competence was a rock in the swirling waters of the journey. It was Kale who found the sheltered hollow to weather the worst of the storms. Kale who could read the subtle signs of a hidden spring. Kale who taught the younger hunters how to stalk the wild horses that were their main source of food. He earned the clan's respect and with it, Borin's simmering jealousy. The chieftain began to see Kel's skill not as an asset but as a challenge to his own authority, which was propped up entirely by Anya's prophecies. The seer's power, meanwhile, became legendary. When a little girl wandered off during a fog and the search parties grew frantic, it was Anya who, after a night of supposed communion with the spirits, led them directly to the small cave where the child was sheltering. The clan saw a miracle. Kale, who had been part of the search, saw something else. Anya had followed a set of nearly invisible wolf tracks that had circled back towards the caves, a simple tracking sign any good hunter might have noticed. Her miracle was merely keen observation, cloaked in mysticism. His doubts solidified into a hard certainty. Anya was not reading the future. She was reading the present with extraordinary skill and passing it off as divine will. But why? What was the purpose of this grand deception? After 2 years of relentless travel, a lifetime lived on the move, they saw it. Rising from the eastern horizon, a jagged line of blue and white against the sky. A wall of mountains. A range so vast and formidable it seemed to hold up the sky. The land of unbroken mountains. A cry went up from the people, a sound of pure, unadulterated triumph. They had made it.
Ow.
They had walked out of a cursed land and into paradise.
8.
They scrambled into the foothills, finding deep valleys sheltered from the wind, rivers teeming with fish, and forests full of game. The prophecy was fulfilled. Anya was a living god, and Borin was the leader who had brought them to salvation. Their faith was absolute, their unity forged in the crucible of the journey. They were home. But Kale felt more unmoored than ever. In the midst of the celebration, he watched Anya retreat to a secluded spot high in the hills. Her work was done, yet she seemed to find no joy in it. Her face, when she thought no one was watching, was a mask of profound, inconsolable grief. The lie, whatever it was not over. Driven by a need that felt like a hot coal in his gut, Kale began to watch her, tracked her movements, using the skills he had perfected on the steppe. He followed her to a hidden alcove, tucked behind a waterfall, her private sanctuary. He waited until she left, then slipped inside. The place was not a shaman's shrine. There were no ritual objects, no sacred bundles of herbs. Instead, hidden beneath a loose slab of rock was a leather pouch. Kel's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were not the instruments of a seer, but of a cartographer. There were dozens of flat, polished bones. Etched onto them with a fine flint point were not spirit symbols, but lines the curves of rivers, the hash marks of hills, the V-shapes of valleys. It was a map. A detailed, astonishingly accurate map of the entire journey they had just undertaken. He even recognized the bend in the river where they'd been camped when the little girl went missing. But there was something else. A separate piece, a shard of mammoth tusk, polished smooth. Carved into its surface was not a map, but a picture. It was crude, but the emotion it conveyed was unmistakable. It showed a tall man, a smaller woman, and a tiny child holding the man's hand. A family. The lie was laid bare. This entire migration, this great spiritual quest that had defined his people's existence and cost so many lives, was not born of a divine vision. It was planned, executed from a map. He confronted her that evening in the alcove. He laid the bone maps on the ground between them. "What is this, Anya?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "The spirits did not guide us. These bones did." "You lied?" Anya looked at the maps, then at Kel's face. The decades of carefully constructed composure fell away, and for the first time, he saw the raw, unshielded woman beneath. Her face crumpled, and a dry, racking sob tore from her throat. "Yes," she whispered, the words seeming to drain all the life from her. "I lied." "Why?" Kel demanded. "Why would you do this? The deaths. It's the hardship. For what?" She took a deep, shuddering breath and began her confession. The story poured out of her, a torrent of pain held back for more than 10 winters. She spoke of a time before she was the seer, when she was just a woman named Anya. Her mate was a hunter named Ren, a man who had been Kel's father's closest friend. They had a daughter, little Nima. "There was a sickness back then too," she said, her voice hollow. "Not in the animals, but in us. Coughing sickness that ate the lungs from the inside. My Nima caught it first. Then Ren." She looked at Kale, her eyes boring into him. "You remember the law of the clan, passed down by your grandfather? The law your own father enforced?" Kel's blood ran cold. He remembered. Any person who caught the lung sickness, along with their entire immediate family, was to be driven out, exiled, a brutal but necessary sacrifice to prevent the plague from consuming the whole tribe. "Your father, the chieftain?" He pronounced the sentence. Anya's voice was barely a whisper. "He exiled us. His best friend. My sick child. He drove us out onto the steppe to die, to save the rest of you." The waterfall seemed to roar in Kel's ears. He could picture it. His father, a man he remembered as just and kind, making an impossible choice. "But that," Anya continued, a bitter twist on her lips, "is not the whole story." She explained how, on the night of their exile, Kel's father had come to her in secret. His face was a ruin of guilt and grief. He had pressed a leather pouch into her hands, the very pouch Kale had just found. It was his secret, she said. A map, given to him by his father, who heard a legend from a wandering stranger of a land to the east. It was just a story. "But your father, he gave it to me. I cannot save you from the law," he told me, "but perhaps I can give you a direction." It was his penance. A final, useless gift. She described the nightmare of her journey. Following the map, she carried her dying daughter, while her dying mate stumbled behind. Nima had died in her arms during the first winter. Ren had lasted until the spring, finally succumbing on the bank of a river in the middle of the vast, empty steppe. She had buried them both with her own hands and continued on alone. Fueled by a grief so immense it had burned away everything soft inside her, she had found it. The land of unbroken mountains. She had spent 2 years here, alone, exploring its valleys, learning its secrets, and then she had walked back. All the way back to the long river, a journey of ghosts. She arrived in the midst of a blizzard, a wraith returning from the dead, and told the clan the spirits had saved her. She began to use her knowledge of this new land, its weather patterns, its animal behavior, to perform small miracles. She became the seer. Her confession came to its terrible, inevitable conclusion. "When the animal sickness began, I saw my chance," she said, her voice now cold and hard as the bone maps. "I created the prophecy. I fanned the flames of fear. I knew every step of the journey, because I had already walked it in blood and tears. I did it to save you, you think?" She let out a sharp, broken laugh. "I did it because I wanted every one of you to feel it. The cold, the hunger, the hopelessness. The grief of burying your loved ones in a land that does not want you. I wanted this tribe to suffer the same exile you imposed on my family. This was never a journey of salvation. It was my revenge." Kale stared at her, horrified. The entire founding story of his people, their great triumph of faith, was a meticulously planned act of vengeance. They hadn't been led by a prophet. They had been driven by a ghost. He was the chieftain now. Boren had died a year ago, gored by a bison, and Kale, by unanimous consent, had taken his place. He was the leader of the people of the Unbroken Mountains, a people whose very existence in this new world was built upon an epic lie, fueled by a single woman's bottomless grief. He looked past Anya, out of the alcove, at the sun setting over the majestic, soaring peaks of his new home. This promised land. He now had a choice. He could expose her, shatter the faith that held his people together, and reveal their sacred history as a fraud. Or he could become a keeper of the lie, ruling over a kingdom he knew was founded not on divine will, but on the unforgiving justice of a woman who had lost everything. The weight of the bones in his hand felt heavier than any mountain. The true burden of his father, the terrible cost of leadership, had finally found him, here at the end of the world.